WGBH has a long history of participating in access technologies going all the way back to 1971, when the Caption Center was founded. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Descriptive Video Service was founded in 1990, and this is the original provider and inventor of audio descriptions or video descriptions for broadcast television. That was founded in 1990. NCAM came along in 1991. NCAM, at that time, was a facility that was founded to research and develop ways to make accessible emergent forms of electronic media. So in 1990, 1991, what was the emergent form of electronic media? It was the internet, and all the things that came to live on the internet, like the web, like file transfer, and nowadays, things like video streaming services. So NCAM was founded as an R&D facility to study ways to make electronic media of all types, online and in the real world, like on TV and in movie theaters and places like that, accessible to people primarily with sensory impairments. Over the years, we've done a lot of federally funded work around development of technology, around the use of that technology in various spheres, like the academic sphere. What is probably of the most fascinating interest to everyone in this room is standards development. Come on. Standards are great. Standards are what make this world run. And I've helped to write. So, we have participated in the creation of standards and recommendations and legislation and policy in just about every sphere of accessibility for the past 30 years. So we have expertise in not just web accessibility and document accessibility, but in media accessibility. We've helped to write the CBAA. We helped to create the guidelines for getting captions online. We've even helped to write caption markup languages like TTML and multimedia languages like Smile, if anybody here remembers Smile. So that's the history of NCAM. But what I want to talk about briefly is the history of accessibility technology. Going back to 1971, when the Caption Center was founded at WGBH with federal funding, to figure out a way to make TV accessible to people who can't hear. In 1971, the Caption Center was founded. In 1972, the very first caption program aired on television. It was called French Chef with Julia Child. This was a big deal. This was a huge deal, and it was not easy to pull off. One of the things that had to be done is we had to figure out a way to transmit the video with words on top and not make anybody mad. Well, we kind of cast aside the not make anybody mad part, and we put open captions on the video, what we would now call open captions. And these captions were not necessarily very pretty. I didn't bring a picture this time, but they looked like, if anyone here is familiar with chyrons or Vitafonts, it's just blocks of letters on the screen. These were really summaries. These were not verbatim captions like we have now. These were just summaries, because at the time there was no research about people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Can they read quickly enough to keep up with what's being said? No one knew. So the captions that were written were really summaries. In 1973, we began a project with ABC that lasted about 9 years, called ABC Caption News. Some of you may remember that as well. In fact, this was my first exposure to captioning when I saw in the TV guide, when I was in high school, this thing called a captioned ABC Evening News, and I didn't know what it was, so I turned it on, and I was fascinated by, wow, words on the screen, that's really cool, but they don't match the audio. And that's because, again, these were just summaries. But the way that the news broadcast worked is that at 6 o'clock, WGBH would record the ABC Evening News feed, and between 6:30 and 10 o'clock, caption writers would transcribe, edit, condense, the script, and then they would bang that script into a big machine called a Vitafont, which is a big rack-mounted device. And that Vitafont would create the open captions that would sort of be burned into the video, which was then rebroadcast at 10 o'clock every night, 5 nights a week. That went on until about 1982 or 1981. In 1973, we began working with others to develop closed captioning, which was obviously sorely needed, and the first closed caption programs were broadcast in 1980. Anybody know what it was? What some of them were? Son of Flubber? Well, Fred McMurray. That was one of them. In 1980, if you wanted to see Captions, you had to go to Sears, and only Sears, and you had to buy a set-top box that cost $100, called a Telecaption 1 decoder. In 1980, $100 was a lot of money. It's still a lot of money, but it was a lot more money then. It was a set-top box, you attached it to your TV antenna. If the signal coming in had captions on a certain space in the video signal, the TC1 would open them up and show them on the screen. If you didn't want to see them, you turn them off. That's the closed part of closed captioning. Open captions are always visible. Closed captions, you turn them on and off. You learn nothing else today. That's what you learn. Throughout the 90s and into the early 2000s, WGBH and NCAM conducted many projects about the use of captions in the classroom. At that point, we figured, well, we've kind of figured out how to get captions on TV. Now let's see where else they can be used. And this is when all the big studies began in NCAM and in other places that have been mentioned about captions in the classroom. It became clear very quickly that you can use captions in a number of classroom or academic settings. Our studies primarily focused on kids, kids who were deaf or hard of hearing, as well as people who were learning English as a second language. And we were able to demonstrate that captions could be used not only to help kids with disabilities read and write, but also comprehend better, reinforcement. But we also discovered that captions are a great tool for teaching people English if they're speakers of other languages. We developed some software that came out of those projects. Maybe some of you have heard of some of this software called CC School or CC Junior, Quick Caption School. These were all software tools that you could buy. You'd have to buy some additional hardware as well to write your own captions in the classroom. And a number of teachers did this. It was a big undertaking, but people actually took to it. In the online revolution, we saw a way to get captions online. This was a big trick. But in 2000, we released some free software called Magpie. Maybe there are some people in the room that have used Magpie or remember it fondly or otherwise. Magpie was the world's first free online captioning tool. You could download it. It was a little Java thing that ran on your computer, and you used it to edit captions and even audio descriptions. In 2015, we released a tool that is in use at a public TV station in the Caribbean. Who knew, right? That is called CC Webcaster. And what CC Webcaster does is it takes existing captions, let's say that are in the broadcast stream, and strips them from the TV signal and immediately funnels them online. So you can repurpose captions that are being written live or captions that are pre-recorded that are being aired and you want to air the same program on your website but with captions. That's CC Webcaster. And then finally, the thing I want to talk about is Cadet, which stands for Captioning and Description Editing Tool. Okay? Cadet is sort of a reboot of Magpie. Okay? Cadet is a tool that you can use to write your own captions, write your own audio description scripts. But unlike Magpie, it runs in a browser. So if you use a Mac, if you use Windows, if you like Linux, you can run Cadet in any browser, and you can use it in a number of ways. This is what it looks like. You can use Cadet to write your own captions from scratch using any video, or you can use Cadet to, say, take captions that have been written elsewhere, like using YouTube's auto-translate function, which Jeff very nicely summed up with his raised eyebrow, I think. And you can import those captions and clean them up in Cadet before sending them back to YouTube. Now, of course, you can clean them up in YouTube too, but this is more efficient, I think at least. And you can not only clean up the text, but you can also clean up the timing if you need to. Okay? And then send it back. Cadet supports not just, like I said, writing captions from scratch, but you can import captions that have been written in any number of popular or legacy formats. And then you can create the proper caption format for whatever player you're using. Okay. Cadet was developed in part with funding from the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, and it's free. This is the best part. There's the URL on the screen. If you can't see the screen, it's ncamftp.wgbh.org/cadet, CNDET. We update Cadet on a pretty regular basis. And there's also a discussion forum monitored by certain people in the room who would be happy to answer your questions. This picture that I would like to show you here is, unlike this picture, which is the caption editor, this is the picture of Cadet's audio description editor. Okay, it looks a lot like the caption editor. You can use Cadet to write your own audio description scripts, and then use that script to record human narration for audio description, or even to generate text-to-speech descriptions, which Lily referred to as well, which is a new way of providing audio descriptions for certain types of videos. So Cadet does both captions and descriptions. And then finally, uses for Cadet are wide and varied. Cadet is not a broadcast captioning tool. It's not necessarily a tool for everyone. If you have lots and lots of videos to caption, you might want to hire a service to do it for you, it's more efficient. On the other hand, if you produce a video a month, a couple of videos a week that are short, you might find that captioning it yourself is efficient enough for you to use a free tool like Cadet. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague Brian to pick up your one. And he's going to tell you a little bit about NCAM's consulting services.
How long are we going to?
Well, we ended at 2:15.
Okay. I'll leave plenty of time for questions. I'm Brian Gould. I've been working with Jeff for a very, very, very long time.
I'm actually Brian's father.
But sometimes it feels like it. So at NCAM, Jeff nicely summarized our history in R&D, focusing on captions. We've also been working almost the same amount of time in R&D in all areas of media, and especially in digital media. And the biggest shift for us over the last 5 years has been, we continue to do research and development in media accessibility, but a big shift from doing research and development to consulting. So using everything we've learned and working directly with organizations to help make their content, their platforms, their media, their digital experience and offerings accessible. So I had a whole bunch of notes about WCAG 2.0, AA, and what it meant to be accessible, but it sounds like this group is already pretty well versed in it, and our earlier sessions covered that well. So what I will say is that one of the key things that NCAM does these days is to help organizations, colleges and universities, but ensure that their web experiences are compliant with WCAG 2.0, AA, AAA, single A, and that covers all of those other standards, guidelines, and best practices are well summed up just by saying WCAG 2.0 AA. That's essentially the international and industry standard for web accessibility. And our clients, of course, are K-12 education and at colleges and universities. We also work in entertainment. We work with museums. We work with other cultural institutions. We work in transportation. We work in entertainment. We work with amusement parks. Anywhere there's a screen or a speaker or any digital content, accessibility has to be thought of. And more, there is, as we heard earlier, and you may even know from personal experience, there's a lot of legal pressure on organizations to ensure that there is compliance with international digital accessibility standards. So what do? We help to interpret what all of those criteria under those guidelines mean and how they're relevant to your products and what you're offering. We will do reviews, just a simple evaluation. And so most college, I'll keep this in the higher ed realm, of course. So college and universities usually have two different kinds of web experiences. One is like a brochure website usually, that's for prospective students or maybe alumni. Lots of pictures, lots of text, maybe some videos, maybe some forms to fill out to contribute. And that's one kind of website. The other is what we call the really functional website, right? That's your library website, that's your course sign up, that could be for billing, that could be all of the other functions, and that is a far more extensive review and evaluation, but it's one that we're very familiar with and we're happy to work with. And we work in any way that is most useful for the institution. So we can do a full review, provide an entire report, basically a punch list for your developers or for your vendors on how to make your web experience, your digital media more accessible. Or we can give you the top 10 things you need to do. It's whatever works for you. It's not a one-size-fits-all. The second bullet, I can't tell you how pleased I was to sit in the audience and hear multiple times presenters talk about putting the accessibility requirements back onto vendors. This is something we have been counseling clients on for years, and I will tell you, your colleagues in K-12 education are starting to see this big time. States and school districts are really pushing back on educational publishers and on assessment vendors in their contracts to say, we will not buy from you if what you are selling us is not accessible. Okay, so what do we do in that sphere? We will help your organization to write that language into your procurement policies, review your contracts for you, and also ensure that when your vendor does deliver, that it is accessible and that it's doing what they said that it would do in your contract. Accessible platforms. So, what's a platform? A platform is a video platform where you're delivering content. A platform is an ebook reader. A platform is a website. A platform is anywhere where content is being delivered. So you can have all the caption videos you want, but as we saw some examples earlier in the day, if the platform fails in accessibility, that content's no longer accessible. If someone is using a computer and cannot use a mouse, or is using assistive technology, but a mouse is required to press play or to turn on the captions, you may have an accessible video, but the platform makes it inaccessible. So we talk about ecosystem, and that word gets thrown around a lot, whatever you want. The entire realm of how you're delivering anything digitally needs to be reviewed for accessibility, and it's an ongoing process. I think I don't need to tell anybody in the room that accessibility isn't that thing you do in FY18, and it's like, well, we did that back then. It needs to be baked in to your process, everyone's process. Another big thing that we have, that we work on is we often get contacted by somebody in the library, or somebody in compliance, or somebody in legal, or a faculty member who is working in UDL, Universal Design for Learning, said, how can you help us ensure that my stuff is accessible? And then, their eyes are opened wide when they find out what accessibility really means, what the requirements are, and that this really applies to everything you're putting online. Well, what do you need? You often need money. You need support from your administration. So what we will often do is do trainings or just informational sessions with every level of your organization, not just your content creators, but we do that too. Not just legal or admin, but we do that too. Your frontline representatives, when someone says, hey, is this thing that you make accessible? Well, whoever's on the phone or answering that email needs to know, and needs to know the proper terminology to use to answer those questions. And of course, higher up the food chain, the people with the purse strings need to know why this is important, not just because you are open to legal action, but because often, for all the reasons we've heard all day, you're actually making a much better product if it's universally designed and accessible for everybody, because not everybody, very few people are going to self-identify, but you're helping many more people creating a universally designed website or content. So let's move to content. Videos, PDF documents, text and websites, images. One of the very first criteria of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is make sure that you have text alternatives to images. Think about all of the courses that you're providing in your institution. Think about some of the images that are used there, right? So we have done extensive research and development in writing guidelines, effective guidelines for describing images. That's some of the training we do. We have lots of free material, guidelines. Cadet is a tool we provide with lots of guidelines, lots of training webinars, things like that. But we also do training in-house, and we'll get hired in to do that. We do occasionally do production. We have a team at WGBH that continues to provide captions and audio descriptions. We will also do all text production from time to time, but more often what we do is work with organizations to bake that into their production process, figure out where in the production, content production and delivery system, something like image description or captions or descriptions should be made, because sometimes it belongs with the subject matter experts and believe it or not, the professors or the TA or the grad students, and not here in the DSS office, or not here in the final, push play, make sure everything's done before you push send. And also work on internal guidelines. We heard a little bit about that this morning. What are your standards for captions, for audio descriptions? What are your internal processes? So we'll work with you on that. And I think that's it. Our boss, our fearless leader here, Donna Danielewski, Jeff and I will be around for the rest of the afternoon if you want to talk to us, like everybody else. I think we'll take questions.
So I'm curious, how do you work with the state? Many of us in the room are probably from Massachusetts. So would you say that Massachusetts is leading the charge well compared to other states? I mean, how much of this is impacted by states' priorities and budget streams?
Well, I think budget stream is probably the best way to put it. It really depends on a state is not
Right.
everything.
Yeah.
So there may be requirements, and some organizations doing very well. I mean, can we talk about some of the folks we work with in Mass? Yeah. The state. So we work with several different areas in terms of state agencies, but it's city by city and budget by budget. It really is.
It's very fractured.
It is.
Can you talk a bit about the consulting services? How do you determine the costs? I'm thinking, for a university, do you have any guidelines? How would we be able to anticipate approximately how much it would cost?
So we work almost exclusively on just a regular hourly rate, but we work very closely with each client to determine what that engagement might be and look like. And our goal really is,
You have to move, I can't.
to use the old metaphor, we want to teach you to fish. We don't want to do it all for you. You probably have the resources internally to get this going. And if you don't need to hire us to come and live with you for the next 10 years. The first engagement is informational, get to know what the issues are, and then guide you. And we don't necessarily need to do all the work. We can be your sort of guiding consultants through that process.
Right, if I could just add to that, to Brian's point, that's what we typically do, is we'll do a phase 1 engagement that's very small, a few hours, to sort of help plan a prioritized approach for what you need to do. And our goal is, the nice thing about the considerable expertise we have is that we don't have a one-size-fits-all. We sort of meet you where you are and say, what are the hottest priorities for you? Where do they fit within your fiscal year, within your development cycle? We try and figure out sort of how to get the most bang for your buck. And the other thing that we do is wherever you could talk about it, we want to stretch those dollars too, so wherever you do something and can make hay with it, either by talking about it or by sharing it with your colleagues or by bringing in your vendors, any way that you can sort of stretch that dollar, because we work in a nonprofit setting too, we know what the realities are. We want to help you do that. So our goal is to be there to support you, but not sort of take it over and not own it for you.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question.
One of the last things you mentioned was that you'll help the institution that you work with develop best practices or standards. Are there some sort of I mean, I think we've all stumbled across some, but do you have some which you recommend anyway that are a little bit more accessible than going into an actual standard or something like that? Like, is there a cheat sheet for, you know, these are the 10 big things to look for to make sure you're not doing?
Yes, they exist. It depends on, and they're, the ones I'm thinking off the top of my head are for specific areas, like for captions or for description. Somebody mentioned in an earlier presentation the caption description key from the Scribe and Caption Media project. That's an excellent one. And we refer people to that all the time. There's other examples like that. So yes, and we even have lots of free guidelines and sort of recommended practices through on the NCAM website.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I can actually pile on that a little bit. For just general web accessibility resources, one of the best places to go is the Web Accessibility Initiative. You can see, just go to w3.org/WAI. If you go to the area about accessibility guidelines, there are a million links to supporting materials. You can read the specification if you want, but there are a lot of supporting materials that they provide, from tutorials to cheat sheets to how-tos to what's something called Easy Checks, which is sort of a checklist of the biggest hits in accessibility.
Do you know anybody who's created any of those tutorials?
I've met a lot.
Even I can understand.
Yeah.
some.
All right. Thank you very much. It's wonderful presentation.
So maybe get up and stretch for a few minutes, we'll reset the program.